the subcommittee on Commerce, Trade, and Consumer Protection will come to order for the purpose of a hearing on growing U.S. trade in green technology. The chairman will recognize himself for 5 minutes for the purposes of an opening statement. I want to thank the members of the subcommittee for participation in this important discussion. The world is currently engaged in an important economic and political shift. As President Obama said, and I quote, "In the 21st century, we know that the future of our economy and national security is inextricably linked to one challenge, energy," end of quote. All the developing and industrialized nations are taking bold steps to address their energy needs and environmental challenges. In this race, some are increasing their production capacity. Others are acting to protect their domestic markets. And some whose domestic markets are already matured are opening up new markets for their industry. According to the New American Foundation, the U.S. moved from a positive trade balance of $14.4 billion in green technology in 1997 to a deficit of $8.9 billion in 2008. And that included renewable energy products. These figures amount to almost a $21 billion swing in a little over 20 years. If our green technology exports continue to plummet, then the U.S. will miss out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to become a global leader in the green energy sector. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, the increase in exports of green technology could reach $40 billion per year and could create more than 750,000 jobs by 2020. It is estimated that the green technology industry in the U.S. employs 9.1 million U.S. workers. However, only 6 American companies are among the top 30 leading companies in the world in the green energy sector. As we embark on this new adventure, which I would like to call the Green Crusade, the future of the U.S. economy will not only depend on a vibrant domestic policy, but will also be driven by the global marketplace. Now we are presented with the following question: how do we reverse our trade balance and compete in this global market? How do we spur green jobs by increasing green technology exports? I strongly encourage my colleagues to expand their commitment to significantly increase our exports, help deploy clean technologies to developing countries, and to assist them in addressing climate change, spurring economic growth, and creating job opportunities for all American workers. What will make us a global leader in today's economic environment is to become an export-led economy. The current global movement toward a green economy is an opportunity we must not and we will not miss. I'm deeply honored to welcome all the witnesses to today's hearing. Considering that you all represent different sectors, together, I hope that we can look specifically at how to best enhance America's competitiveness in the burgeoning international market for green technology, and therefore create more domestic job opportunities for our citizens. This hearing is a great opportunity to highlight the importance of a strong domestic policy to facilitate U.S. penetration into the green economy's international market. Also, it's equally important that we include a strong long-term export promotion policy to turn our current domestic economy into a global leader that will once again be the envy of the world. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time. It is now my honor to introduce the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the ranking member for today, in substitution thereof. So I'm pleased to be here, and obviously this is a very important hearing, and so I want to welcome all the witnesses. Thank you for your time. It's important, I believe, to have a conversation about the opportunities that trade holds for American jobs and American ingenuity, particularly in the emerging green technology sector. We must view trade as an opportunity and not a threat if we want to see our exports grow. Free trade has many benefits to the global economy, driving economic growth, reducing poverty, and raising the standard of living for everyone. Domestically, internationally, trade accounts for approximately 1/3 of our gross domestic product, and we depend on dynamic open markets to sustain our well-being and, of course, our way of life. Today's hearing will focus on ways to expand our trade exports in the, quote, green technology, end quote. As we discovered at our previous hearing on the marketing of green products, defining green, of course, can be difficult, if not impossible. Regardless of how we define it, improving the opportunities and avenues to increase our exports in goods and services is obviously a worthy goal, particularly as we look to new businesses and new business models to pick up the slack in economic activity that is affecting many of our industries today during the current economic downturn. The easiest step Congress can take to enact the free trade agreement we have already negotiated is to simply enact this free trade agreement we have already negotiated, but which has not been acted upon. There's no simpler way to open new markets for these great innovations and increase our exports than to enact the free trade agreement. Last year, for example, we ran a $21 billion surplus in manufacturing with our free trade agreement partners, countries. On top of that, we ran a surplus in all our services trade of approximately $144 billion. If we lower the barriers to our export, it is clear that there are willing buyers in the global economy. We must lower those barriers. And the benefit of this are not theoretical. High tariffs on our green energy exports that are currently prohibited in countries like Colombia would instantly disappear with the enactment of the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Green technology encompasses a broad array of activities, ranging from those designed to minimize the impact on the environment to those that seek to improve efficiencies in production. But many discussions about green technology will naturally focus on the energy industry. While we vigorously debate whether to institute a national tax to limit our consumption of fossil fuels, we cannot expect many of the world's developing nations to simply voluntarily change their energy policy if it requires them to sacrifice their growth. Similarly, American companies and taxpayers should not have to shoulder the burden of a policy that, of course, limits our economic growth. So today, let's focus this discussion on how to expand economies by expanding trade and cooperation. We don't need an international agreement like the Kyoto Agreement on energy and the environment to benefit our trade exports in green technology. We've seen that earlier in my opening statement here with the 17 countries we have a free trade agreement with. We have pioneered technology and services over decades, including those that provide efficiency gains and pollution reduction. The progress of our energy sector has produced and will continue to produce new developments that improve energy delivery, such as the smart grid technology. These improvements can be transferred to developing nations through trade. Selling our innovations to the world will provide developing nations the technology to improve their energy efficiency, promote conservation, and limit adverse effects on our global environment. To achieve these goals, we must make a marketplace receptive to our services, and we must incentivize the private sector to innovate. Therefore, our trade policy must insist that our partners protect intellectual property rights. A healthy and innovative market cannot succeed without the appropriate rewards that follow true innovation and invention. Whether it is a Hollywood studio movies or the latest advance in energy efficiency, protection for our innovators, intellectual property facilitate bringing successful products to the market. And finally, Mr. Chairman, as we look at ways to reduce barriers to trade in green technology, we also must be mindful of the mistakes other countries have made in their efforts to develop green industries. Taxpayer-funded subsidies don't necessarily work. History has shown the fundamental law of economics, government intrusion and regulation distorts markets. If the marketplace cannot support it, why should taxpayers? Evidence is mounting that government innovation and support for particular industries in our country is distorting the marketplace at great cost to the taxpayers without parallel benefits. We know from our own experience that the housing market was heavily subsidized through incentives, tax credits, and easy financing. The resulting boom and bust should be a note of extreme caution to all of us that we not distort this market through heavy-handed intervention and regulation. Congress cannot be in the business of choosing winners and losers in a particular industry. Rather, we should endeavor to ensure every company simply has equal opportunity to succeed or to fail. Thank the witnesses again, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair thanks the ranking member. Now the chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, for 5 minutes for the purposes of opening statement.
I thank the chairman. I hope I won't take that much time. In fact, I think I'm the guy that the witnesses have been waiting for, because once I'm through, then y'all get to talk. I think I'm going to be the last person. Well, wait a minute. We got a late joiner. I want to first apologize for those who aren't here and point out that they also participate who can't be personally present. We have a caucus going on right now that was not previously scheduled, so a great many of the members here are absent because they feel pulled in more than one direction. I apologize for that. But I just want to add to the concerns that have been raised. I want to tell you what one of the concerns that I have about this whole area. We've become aware over time of a number of barriers to free and fair trade in the area of green technology. We got tariff barriers, in which some countries are putting up tariffs on green technology from our country, but don't apply to their manufacturers. We got quality certification and safety standards that are not really just about quality control and safety, but more about they're written in such a way as to make sure that only the home producer's products will qualify. So we got stuff masquerading as quality control, but it's really trade protection. We got local content requirements that can do the same thing. We've got development programs that look good on the outside, but they're essentially the home government of the producer basically lending to developing countries on the condition that they buy from their folks and their folks only. So we got a lot of things that look kind of neutral on the outside, but they're all about erecting barriers so that we don't have access to their markets on the same terms that they have access to ours. And what I want to make sure is that whatever we do in this area, that we don't have a one-way street in green technology the way we have in so many other areas. We try and, the two things we got to work with. We got to work with laws, and we got to work with money. What I don't like is the idea that other countries can use laws to keep us out. And we respond to this by not addressing that problem. We end up turning to the taxpayer to try and figure out how to jumpstart our economy when we're playing on an unlevel playing field. And I want to make sure that we're not having to resort to the taxpayers to do for us what the laws ought to do for us. So the question I'll have for all of y'all, whether I'm here to hear it or not, I hope you'll address it for the record and for the benefit of the other members who can't be here, is what are our institutions that are supposed to promote free and fair trade, institutions like the WTO, doing to protect us from this? Because the sense we get in so many other areas of international trade is that we're being played for chumps in this country, that the free trade agreements we got are one-way streets. Other folks were quick to pull the trigger and haul us in front of the WTO at the drop of a hat. But if we try and get access to their markets, we got a case of the slows when it comes to enforcing our rights to access to other people's markets when they're not under any disability at all. So think about that and help us understand what is it about the institutions we got right now that are either working well or not working well, in order to make sure that, as far as the legal framework, our primary responsibility as legislators is to make sure that the laws are protecting free and fair trade. And if they're not doing that or can't do that, I want to know the reason why. So thank you all for this opportunity to visit. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your leadership in bringing this issue before us, and look forward to the testimony and statements of our witnesses.
The chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we'll see if anybody else comes in the room in the next few minutes to continue the opening statements. But I do want to thank the Chairman for calling this hearing and for our panelists. As we all know, our nation is facing one of the worst economic downturns since the Carter administration. Our unemployment rate is approaching 10%, and current estimates predict that it will continue to rise. Given the economic circumstances we're facing, it is important that this subcommittee examine ways to enhance American competitiveness and create jobs, green or any other color. It is also important that we focus on creating jobs given the current energy policies being pushed by this administration. If enacted, the proposed cap-and-trade energy tax would be the most dramatic overhaul of America's energy economy in our lifetime, and it would ship millions of jobs, American jobs, overseas. But the administration has continued to say it is focusing on policies that will create or save jobs. It's good to hear that there is an understanding that we need to create or save jobs, but if we have this cap-and-trade energy tax, I think most of us recognize that we would actually be taking a further downturn in our economic situation. Even countries that have enacted climate change policies have seen negative effects on existing employment. Spain's renewable subsidies, for example, created over 50,000 jobs, but led to the destruction of 113,000 existing jobs in other economic sectors, a loss of 9 permanent jobs for every 1 permanent job created. In addition, 9 out of 10 of the green jobs created in Spain are now gone. That doesn't sound like creating or saving jobs to me. Mr. Chairman, we must improve American competitiveness and enact smart economic policies, not policies that will hurt American companies and ship millions of jobs to countries like China and India. Our international trade industry is one sector that will be crucial to restoring our economy and creating jobs. Unfortunately, there are currently barriers to trade that are hurting our exporters, one of those being the protection of intellectual property rights. There are now some companies that there are some that believe that we should not enforce intellectual property rights and protect patents in the renewable energy industry because the technologies they feel should be free to everyone and that would allow more renewable energy products to be created. Unfortunately, that's a false assumption. Without the proper patent protection and proper enforcement of intellectual property, companies will not take the necessary risks to develop those new technologies. They will have no incentive to do so, and therefore, we will see less innovation and a loss of jobs due to decreased sales. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on our current efforts to remove these trade barriers and to promote export activity. Hopefully, we're not wasting our time promoting products and technologies that will not be exported due to barriers that we are not seeking to remove. Trade is a vital issue to my district, and it is a crucial part of restoring our economic prosperity. I hope that we leave today's hearing with a better understanding of what's being done to promote international trade while ensuring that we protect American jobs and spur innovation and competitiveness. Thank you, and I yield back.
The Chair thanks the gentleman. Now is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome all of our witnesses to this hearing. And it is the normal practice of this subcommittee that we swear in the witnesses. So before I introduce you, why don't I swear you all in at the same time? Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please take your seat. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have all answered in the affirmative. Now, let me introduce the witnesses on this panel. And again, we appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule to be with us. And I also would like to apologize for the scarcity of membership. There is a mandatory caucus meeting for some that is occurring, and so that's the reason why we don't have a lot of members here, but they will be able to review the record. Beginning on my left, Ms. Mary Saunders. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Manufacturing Services at the International Trade Administration. Next to Ms. Saunders is Mr. Tim Richards, who's the Managing Director of International Energy Policy for General Electric Company. And next to Mr. Richards is Lisa Jacobson. Ms. Jacobson is the president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy. And seated next to Ms. Jacobson is Ms. Andrea Larson, who's an associate professor of the Darden Graduate School of Business Administration here at the University of Virginia. And last but not least is Mr. Steve Hayward. He is the F.K. Weyerhaeuser Fellow in Law and Economics at the American Enterprise Institute. I want to thank you again, and want to recognize now Ms. Saunders for 5 minutes of opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Rush, Ranking Member Stearns, and members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for the opportunity to testify before you today on the growing U.S. trade in green technology. As you're aware, this is an innovative and growing sector that has wide-ranging impact, both domestically and internationally. Secretary Locke is leading the Commerce Department in a series of initiatives to further open up markets and provide tangible results to workers and businesses alike. The International Trade Administration within the Department of Commerce is the lead export promotion agency in the federal government, and ITA is working to expand green technology opportunities. Early development and commercialization of green technologies are critical to the competitiveness of U.S. firms. First, these technologies result in greater energy efficiency. Second, as the demand for green technologies grows, so do export opportunities for U.S. companies. As Chairman Rush noted, the Department of Energy estimates there could be up to $40 billion a year in increased exports of green technologies, generating up to 750,000 green jobs by 2020. However, our ability to realize this potential depends on achieving U.S. leadership in the field. General Electric CEO Jeff Immelt and venture capitalist John Doerr noted in an August Washington Post op-ed titled "Falling Behind on Green Tech" that Amazon, eBay, Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo were the leading internet technology companies, and they're all American companies. And yet, out of the top 30 alternative energy companies in the world, only 6 are American. One of Commerce Secretary Locke's priorities is to enable new businesses to enter the market and to increase the number of U.S. businesses that produce green products and services, with particular emphasis on manufacturing. ITA administers a series of programs that are designed to support these goals and priorities to enhance the competitiveness of U.S. industries and firms. And these include, I'll just name a few, a new green tech website that aggregates all of our promotion programs in a single place, providing easy access for industry. An energy efficiency initiative to assist U.S. manufacturers to improve the energy efficiency of their operations as well as to deploy energy-efficient technologies, and industry events on low-carbon energy sources and fuels to improve the domestic and international competitiveness of U.S. clean energy companies. With the world hungry for climate change solutions, the United States must act as an incubator for innovative technologies. ITA is actively promoting U.S. technology solutions to address government-mandated requirements that address the effects of climate change. We have an aggressive green technology promotion program with over 90 trade events planned worldwide for this year and next. As examples, clean technology and alternative energy are the central themes of several ITA export promotion initiatives, a green building event in Europe, and a solar technology and energy efficiency mission to India. In November, we're organizing a 5-city Green Build Roadshow to Pittsburgh, Denver, San Francisco, San Jose, and Phoenix to help U.S. companies take advantage of the $975 billion annual construction market in Europe. We've also ramped up our efforts to promote the commercialization and the export of green technologies through increased outreach to industry on best practices and priority markets, technical assistance, capacity building events, helping develop trade policies that favor cleaner technologies, and addressing those market barriers in other countries. ITA's Sustainable Manufacturing Initiative encourages U.S. companies to use sustainable practices that can make them more competitive in the global marketplace and therefore potentially better export candidates. You can't export what you don't manufacture. And finally, we also have an initiative known as SMART, Sustainable Manufacturing American Regional Tours, that shows small manufacturers how to find success through sustainable manufacturing that improves the bottom line. President Obama has called for new policies to advance a cleaner environment, a stronger response to the challenge of climate change, and more sustainable natural resources and energy supplies. To reach this goal requires effort by both industry and government. And Commerce will continue to prioritize strengthening U.S. competitiveness in this sector and enhancing U.S. capacity to export green technologies. In closing, I would like to thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to highlight ITA's current efforts, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
The chair thanks the witness, Ms. Saunders, and now recognizes Mr. Tim Richards for 5 minutes for the purposes of opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing today. Mr. Chairman, as you've made very clear, the entire world needs cleaner and lower emissions technologies. And the United States has every opportunity to be a major exporter of these products and services. The U.S. Energy Information Administration expects that total world energy consumption will grow by more than 33% by 2030, and that 92% of that growth will occur outside of the United States. And much of that future investment, if not virtually all of that future investment, is going to occur in areas that are more efficient and lower emission than we currently see today. General Electric, with our energy business based in the state of Georgia, is succeeding in selling and creating cleaner, more efficient technologies, and we're selling those all around the globe. We've invested heavily in our Eco-Imagination products, including high-efficiency gas turbines, which have 200-plus U.S. small and medium-sized enterprises as suppliers, technologies for smart grids, coal gasification, nuclear power, solar energy, high-efficiency appliances and lighting, efficient aircraft engines, hybrid locomotives, to name some of the products and services, as well as wind turbines. In this testimony, I'd like to address 3 critical themes for promoting U.S. exports. First, the foundation for successful clean energy exports lies with robust domestic demand. Second, export competitiveness requires a commitment to competition, both here and abroad. And third, the U.S. government can assist the private sector by organizing itself to actively promote competitiveness and exports. With regard to the first theme, robust domestic demand for renewable and other cleaner technologies is necessary to drive innovation, achieve economies of scale, and support a full-fledged manufacturing base, as Ms. Saunders has made clear. This, in turn, will provide the underpinning for strong exports. Critical components of policy in this area are stable incentives, such as renewable energy tax credits and the development of binding national renewable energy standards, such as many other countries have adopted, along with cap-and-trade legislation that establishes mandates and incentives. Unfortunately, U.S. policies currently in place to support renewable energy are insufficient to counter the current weak investor confidence, and they fall short of those systems maintained by other nations. The second theme is the need to maintain competitive and open markets. Even as they call for projects that enhance energy security and reduce emissions, many governments maintain barriers to trade in the very goods needed to realize those projects. To cite a few examples, most WTO members still impose tariffs on wind turbines. In fact, those tariffs average 7.4%. In Brazil, it's 14%, in China, 8%, in India, 7.5%. The U.S. also has a tariff on these products. It's only 1.3%. Still worth reducing, but not as large as our competitors. In addition to these tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers are a serious issue. A few examples there. China maintains a Buy China policy on wind turbines and recently conducted a very large procurement in which no foreign-owned company sold any wind turbines in China. In Canada, Quebec has applied local content requirements for wind turbine procurement. Ontario is considering similar legislation. And here in the United States, of course, we have the Buy America components of the economic stimulus. The protection represented by tariff and non-tariff barriers reduces U.S. exports and runs counter to the goal of promoting a globally competitive industry. Open competition calls for a 3-pronged solution. First, as Congressman Stearns has suggested, Now is the time to roll back existing trade barriers and prevent the application of new barriers. And we can do this through the negotiation of an international agreement eliminating those barriers for all environmental goods and services. This is a high-impact cost reduction step governments can take right now. Second, the U.S. should lead by example and not include Buy America provisions in future legislation. And third, strong intellectual property rights protection, such as has been suggested by several members, is essential to create the economic incentives to develop and deploy new technologies around the globe. The third theme is that there is a positive role for the U.S. government. The federal government is in a position to facilitate the private sector's growth by undertaking two sets of actions. First, export finance enhancements. And second, more active and improved coordination of American advocacy led by the Commerce Department for cleaner energy exports. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, for the opportunity to testify before you this morning. The U.S. is an innovation leader and has the opportunity to become a world-class export leader in this field. And with the proper policy framework, we will achieve that distinction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now the chair recognizes Ms. Jacobson for 5 minutes for the purposes of opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. The Council very much appreciates your leadership on this very important set of issues. The Council is an industry coalition that includes businesses and trade associations from around the country representing currently available technology options to meet pressing energy, national security, economic, and environmental challenges. The Council is committed to enactment of domestic and international policies designed to deploy clean energy technologies such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, and natural gas. The House Energy and Commerce Committee is a leader in the advancement of comprehensive energy and climate change legislation in this Congress with the passage of the American Clean Energy and Security Act. This bill includes vital provisions to support domestic clean energy manufacturing and export promotion. In addition to what's included in the American Clean Energy and Security Act, I would like to offer additional areas that Congress may wish to consider. Given the global nature of clean energy markets, especially for solar, wind, and efficiency products and components, the U.S. has an opportunity to embark on an aggressive and sustained strategy to expand domestic manufacturing and U.S. exports. The strategy should include 6 components. First, strong U.S. markets. Establishment of strong domestic markets will build the foundation for manufacturing and exports. Sending the right signals at home through the adoption of domestic investment and manufacturing incentives, coupled with strong, coordinated, and long-term policy commitments to clean energy sectors is critical. Examples of important initiatives include a national renewable electricity standard and a national energy efficiency standard, support and expansion of the manufacturing tax credit, support for the U.S. Department of Energy Loan Guarantee Program. Those are just a few. Second, as others have acknowledged, free and fair trade policy that includes liberalization of tariff and non-tariff trade barriers to clean energy products and services. Sound trade policy that recognizes the urgent need for clean energy products and technology transfer will help make U.S. products more competitive. A concern expressed by some clean energy industries is that some foreign markets are more restrictive to our own, and Tim Richards made some very specific points in that regard. I would just like to mention again, some nations have domestic content requirements, tariffs, and numerous other protections. These issues should be considered as part of a clean energy trade liberalization effort. Third, intellectual property right protection. Again, seems to be consensus on that topic. As our domestic industries grow and new technologies are developed, it's critical to protect the intellectual property rights of firms that invest and offer innovations to the marketplace. In support of this, I refer to Section 1120A of the Foreign Relations Authorization Act for fiscal years 2010 and 11. This section directs the U.S. government to prevent weakening and fully protect intellectual property rights of energy and environmental technologies. Fourth, flexible and innovative government financing. U.S. firms are best able to compete in foreign markets with instruments that leverage public and private capital and focus on the creation of enduring markets. While still in its early phases, the World Bank's Carbon Investment Fund, seek to embrace this approach. In addition, to better compete with foreign firms, U.S. companies need to be able to match the export promotion support that other governments provide. U.S. firms often face competition from conditioning of overseas development assistance, as well as tied aid, as was mentioned by Congressman Barrow. Currently, the Export-Import Bank of the United States has a process to assist firms, but this process is burdensome and needs to be made more flexible and streamlined. Finally, government financing should be made available to support capacity building and the regulatory and institutional frameworks required to open new markets to clean energy products and services. Fifth, expansion of clean energy technology promotion programs. These should have a strategic, high-level focus and involve multiple agencies, and they should support small, medium, and large companies over the full project development and funding cycle. Government assistance ranges from identification of market opportunities and business partners to pre-feasibility and feasibility studies to assistance with financing and overcoming other market barriers. The U.S. has existing programs in these areas but would benefit from expanded funding, enhanced coordination, and consistent high-level engagement. Other nations approach market development for these sectors in a highly strategic fashion. We can do that too. We just need the high-level and sustained support. Finally, global agreements on climate change and the establishment of a global price on carbon. Clear and long-term market signals such as the establishment of a global price on carbon emissions that contribute to global climate change would offer a more competitive environment for U.S. firms going into a marketplace which it continues to include more regulations in other countries to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, I would like to very quickly acknowledge the important questions that Congressman Solis mentioned about the impact of clean energy jobs and support for clean energy industries. The National Renewable Electricity Laboratory recently released, August 28th of this year, a response to a study that I believe Congressman Solis may have been referring to. It was called the Study of the Effect of Employment of Public Aid to Renewable Energy Sources. That was the name of the report that was released, and NREL has a response to that, technical response to some of those methodologies, and I think it has a slightly different perspective on how support for clean energy industries impacts job creation. So I just wanted to mention that for the record.
Thank you very much. Have you concluded? Yes. Okay, thank you. All right. Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Jacobs. Now, Dr. Larson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute my testimony to the
Would
topic.
you pull the microphone close to you, please?
Thank you for the opportunity to contribute my testimony to the topic today of growing U.S. trade in green technology. I have 3 recommendations for the subcommittee. The first is to support green technology and clean commerce. Second, use that support to drive economic recovery, urban revitalization, and economic development going forward. And third, leverage from the base that's already there and the base that can the base can be expanded to support U.S. competitiveness in world markets, because the United States is now being eclipsed by other countries. Why should the committee listen to these recommendations? I have 35 years of work on economic development, product safety, environmental issues, and sustainability topics. The last 25 years were focused on the private sector, entrepreneurship, innovation, and corporate strategy. And for the last 15 years, I've conducted research and taught MBA students and executives exclusively on the topics at the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and entrepreneurship. My work is about clean commerce. To start with, it's worth noting what we mean by clean commerce. First and foremost, it's about creating jobs and delivering equal or superior product performance to customers at comparable prices compared with the existing alternatives. It's about cost-cutting, profitability, and competitive differentiation for firms. It's about dramatically cutting or eliminating pollution and toxic waste. It's not just about efficiency, it's about innovation first and foremost. It includes green technology, but it's not limited to technology. It also includes non-technical innovation. And critically important, it's not just about energy. Economies are built on energy and materials. Clean commerce means constant progress towards clean energy and benign materials. Drawing from my knowledge base, I can tell you the green technology and clean commerce arena is the biggest opportunity in world markets now and for the foreseeable future. It is the new game. Any country that's willing to build invest to build infrastructure, to innovate, to educate and train, and to support private equity and corporations to build capacities to meet domestic needs and engage in global markets will win at this game. I've watched the United States being left behind in this game over the last decade. The follower strategy, which is what we're doing now, is a legitimate one in the corporate world, and perhaps that's what the United States wants to do. Certainly that is the signal it's sending right now. Yet this is the growth area that's taking off worldwide. And the drivers of the changes, the drivers that are creating this huge opportunity are not going away. This is not a fad or a temporary phenomenon. To give you a sense of what's happening in global markets, Denmark, Germany, India, Japan, and Spain accounted for 91% of global exports of wind power in 2008. The world's 12 major economic stimulus packages propose to invest $180 billion in clean tech in the next few years. Spain invests $430 per capita compared to the United States' $57 per capita in renewable energy. In 2008, China became the world's largest manufacturer of photovoltaic solar panels, with 95% of their volume exported. China has 60% of the total global capacity for solar thermal water heaters, and China protects its domestic clean energy companies, reserving contracts and restricting foreign firms. If you were to point to the leaders in stimulating innovation in clean commerce and driving clean tech, you would look to Japan, Denmark, Spain, Germany, Brazil, China, and India. The European Union has taken the lead in setting high-performance standards for clean consumer products, recycling, and product take-back. So you see leadership there as well. Denmark and Spain have allowed individuals and companies to sell excess electricity generated back to the grid over a decade ago. Germany guaranteed grid access for renewable energy producers as far back as 1991. The United States has just begun to focus on these issues. States are moving to make changes in the light of the fact that the federal government has not been active, but utilities continue to fight these measures. The leaders, countries and companies, global companies, have already committed to significant changes. They have set, and many have achieved, greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, and new ones are then set. They have set and are meeting energy efficiency targets. They've set and are meeting cogeneration targets. They've set and are meeting renewable energy source targets that reduce their national oil dependency, stabilize energy prices, and avoid energy security threats. And that's just the energy picture. As I said, there's comparable progress being made by other countries on clean materials. What we are seeing is national strategies characterized by clear and consistent policies, gradual amendments to update those policies, protections to control consumer costs, mitigation for windfall profits, and simplicity to keep public administration costs low and individual and corporate transaction costs minimal. Given global trade competition in green tech and clean commerce, given that it is fierce, and that's going to only increase, and it's being shaped by national strategies that support and protect domestic innovation and manufacturing, the U.S. is now at a significant competitive disadvantage compared to other countries that have already experimented, learned, adapted, and refined integrated national policies that mobilize citizen behavior, corporate investment, education, and government purchasing. The future of global trade is absolutely clear, and clean commerce and green tech are at its core. For emerging and developing economies alike, industrial and commercial activity that supports the provision of clean energy and green chemistry design materials, green buildings, sustainably grown foods, and clean transportation, so that clean air, clean water, and healthy soil are preserved by design. These actions are increasingly recognized as delivering on capitalism's promise of prosperity. And if you're adopting these strategies, companies and countries can gain competitive advantage. The companies and the countries that understand this new reality will dominate world trade in critical growth industries. The question is, do we want to lead or follow? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Larson. Mr. Haywood, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rush and members of the committee. Over at the American Enterprise Institute, I spend a lot of time with a team of 7 or 8 people, economists, lawyers, a couple of scientists even, some trade experts, puzzling over the whole picture of energy that changes like a kaleidoscope every day. It's, on the one hand, exhilarating and also daunting. every day something new comes along and something you thought you knew looks differently. I think that whatever happens in the next 10 or 15 years, it's probably different than what we expect right now. And that puts me in the frame of mind of the old comment from either Sam Goldwyn or Yogi Berra, I'm not clear which, who said, never prophesy, especially about the future. That being said, I think there's two sort of broad issues, some of which have already been suggested here today, that need to be thought about long and hard. The first is, what are the actual dynamics of the present marketplace, and how will those market dynamics change under a variety of policy regimes, either enacted by the industrial world or the entire world in concert, specifically schemes, whether cap and trade or a tax to put a higher price ban for carbon-based energy. And then second, what are some of the cross-cutting factors that will come to bear on how trade flows will unfold in the real world? And I think there are two factors in that category. One has already been suggested, but I'll sharpen it a little bit further. We face the prospect of incipient trade protection and retaliation for things such as border adjustment tariffs that are contemplated in the Waxman-Markey bill. But then also the problem that's been, everyone has mentioned, of intellectual property rights for energy technology innovations that the United States may bring to the marketplace over the next several decades. Above all, I'm always a little troubled about claims for new jobs or new business that depend vitally upon subsidies or mandates from Washington. I think Congress in general is well advised to resist schemes in which business profits are more dependent on the political marketplace in Washington rather than the competitive marketplace outside Washington. You can point to a lot of energy innovations and efficiency improvements. My favorite is jet aircraft engines, which GE and Pratt & Whitney, for example, are the leaders in the world in developing, that needed neither subsidies nor mandates. And in fact, as I look at the top 10 categories of American manufacturing exports, starting with civilian aircraft equipment, $73 billion in 2007, none of those need subsidies and mandates, with the possible exception of financing from the Export-Import Bank and so forth. As at the present time, it has been mentioned, the U.S. runs a trade deficit in renewable energy technologies, and I think there's good reason to expect that to continue and maybe even get worse instead of better. I have a table in my testimony showing from the latest complete figures I could find from the Department of Energy and the Census Bureau from 2003 of a breakout of the substantial deficit in our wind power production, our wind power exports and imports, because we import an awful lot of the raw materials for the wind power that we make and install. I noticed that the compact fluorescent light bulbs I've been buying lately are made in China. I think Congress might well ask industry for assurances that in return for subsidies and mandates, expanded production capacity will be located here in the United States and not overseas that have lower materials and labor costs. I'm skeptical that such assurances can be achieved. And beyond that, if we really are going to make, say, 20% of our electricity by wind power by the year 2030, which the Department of Energy says is feasible, I'm skeptical that we can clear the litigation alone for the siting of power lines to do that. But never mind that. If we are going to do that, I wonder if we really are going to be able to expand our own manufacturing capacity enough to meet that kind of ambitious target and have additional new capacity to export it to overseas markets. Meanwhile, I note that roughly 80% of the world's proven reserves of hydrocarbons are based in less developed nations. And even if you got a global carbon price of, say, $28 a ton, that's the figure now contemplated over in the Senate in the Kerry-Boxer bill, hydrocarbon energy will still be cheaper than present renewables at scale and other renewable technologies that the United States might export. And so, in other words, if we place a higher price on carbon in the developed world and the developing world does not, I wouldn't be at all surprised if 10 or 15 years from now our leading energy exports continue to be oil and gas drilling equipment, where we have the best in the world, and where we still enjoy, by the way, a trade surplus. Now, the example of oil and gas technology, I think, illustrates the last point, which is some of the train wrecks that are unfolding in the architecture of our policy in these matters. A lot of our specialized oil and gas drilling technology companies guard their intellectual and proprietary property very closely, seeking to work through partnerships rather than selling licenses or even selling their products overseas, because they're worried about their intellectual property being stolen by the Chinese, for example. And yet, as Mr. Scalise pointed out, we're being told that the dimensions of the climate crisis means we should essentially give away a lot of technology in the interests of the world. Well, maybe so. But I note that over $1 billion in private capital this year, at least $1 billion, is going into algae-based biofuels. A long way off, but I know a lot of people are very optimistic. It's hard to believe our entrepreneurs putting this much capital are going to want to give away that technology. In the meantime, a lot of developing nations at their opening bid at Copenhagen are saying the developed world should provide $100 to $200 billion a year in foreign aid so they can buy our technology. Either way, it looks like American companies will be asked to sell or give away their products cheaply, or that American taxpayers will be made to pay for it. And then finally, I already mentioned the prospect of border adjustments for high carbon imports contemplated in some legislation, even if it doesn't run afoul of WTO rules, is likely to be, in my mind, counterproductive. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair thanks all the witnesses. And now the chair will proceed with the questioning segment of this hearing, and thereby recognizing himself for 5 minutes for the purposes of questioning the witnesses. As I said in my opening statement earlier, in many instances, we see that other countries have policies that make it difficult for U.S. companies to compete in the global market. Emerging markets in countries like Russia, China, India, and Brazil have tariff barriers. Countries with the largest demand for green technology products like China, EU member states, and Japan have increased their demand and thus their production capacity. Moreover, Denmark and Germany are promoting their export through international development programs. As a result of this, out of the top 30 countries in solar, wind, and advanced batteries, we can count only 6 American companies. Is it not a surprise that we have a trade deficit in this sector? My question is really to each and every one of you. How would you characterize our current energy policy, especially as it relates to export promotion of green technologies? And as a follow-up to that question, obviously, in order to return to a positive balance of trade, the U.S. needs to have a policy that addresses competition on more than one front. And if you had to prioritize what needed to be done to increase our exports, what would be the first action the federal government must undertake? Those are 2 questions. I would like for answers beginning with Ms. Saunders.
Thank you very much. As to characterizing the U.S. energy policy, I would characterize it as evolving. There's quite a few legislative proposals on the table, as well as regulatory proposals from, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency. As to whether the energy
is it slowly evolving or rapidly evolving?
Evolving.
Okay.
As to whether the energy, and let me say this, a rapid deployment of clean or green technologies does depend heavily, as I think several of the other speakers have noted, on the policy environment. That's true here in the United States. That's true in foreign countries as well. So our export markets will be enhanced insofar as we see a policy environment in other countries such as China, India, Brazil, which stimulates clean technologies. I think Dr. Larson mentioned that in her opinion, some of those governments are ahead of the U.S. government, but the major point remains that the policy environment is critical to facilitate rapid deployment of clean technologies. We are working as effectively as we can at the Department of Commerce within the current level of funding and the current level of responsibilities. Secretary Locke intends to call the first meeting of the Trade Promotion Coordinating Committee later this month and meet with the principals. This is the 19 agencies that have trade promotion responsibilities, and I know that a key topic of discussion will be the clean technology discussion and how to coordinate the resources of those 19 agencies, which include the State Department, Department of Commerce, U.S. Trade Representative's Office, and many other agencies, to ensure that we're doing all that we can to promote exports by U.S. companies.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Richard, would you care to
Thank you,
respond?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, in terms of the U.S. energy policy. I think the important point is that under the status quo, we're actually going to see a reduction in the total installation of wind turbines and other renewable products this year, probably about half of what was installed last year. So current policy, combined with the situation with the recession, has resulted in a dramatic decline from what was being achieved before. And we do need long-term significant policy reform in order to turn that around. In terms of prioritizing actions, of all the things that I talked about in my remarks, I think the thing that the United States could lead on and do quickly that is purely export-oriented is to negotiate an agreement internationally that removes many of the barriers you talked about, remove tariffs and remove non-tariff measures, and do it for environmental goods and services.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobson.
Yes, thank you. I think I'll start by echoing that last comment made by Tim Richards. We very much support a streamlined effort to liberalize clean energy goods and services. So I hope that that will be taken up by the coordinating committee and that it will be supported, continue to get support in Congress. Very briefly, in terms of where things stand with energy policy and clean energy export programs, in talking to my industries, I think they've seen significant improvement in the last several years. There are many more programs that support them. They are being more effective, and generally speaking, there's been improvement. But there's, compared to what is seen in other countries like Germany, a very strategic pinpoint effort that is high level and sustained. We're not quite there yet. And so we need to take that opportunity to have a strategic, coordinated, sustained, and high-level effort on clean energy export promotion. And then finally, again, support for domestic market will help our export opportunities and the U.S. players in the export industries. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Larson.
Thank you. I would characterize the energy policy as very fragile and new and slow-moving, given that it's coming out of a void for a number of years, that there really hasn't been no national energy policy. So that answers the first question you had. The second, what would be the most important thing to try to reinforce exports at this stage? There is an enormous amount of entrepreneurial activity, VC, venture capital activity, private equity investment going on now in this arena. It's just exploded in the last few years. If there are ways to reinforce this activity, to build domestic capacity for innovation and then scalability, and immediately followed by export, which will happen if we have the volume, if we have the scalability and we have the volume, that's what I would focus on. I also think, though, that there is an issue in this country with we lag not just on commerce, but we also lag in education and training. And if you don't pay attention to those issues in this arena of clean commerce, then we can't develop the intellectual and the skills and practical training capacity that we need to build our domestic infrastructure. And without that, it's very hard to be able to export.
Thank you very much. Mr. Haywood.
Yeah, I think I'll just limit myself to a comment about the state of energy policy. I'm always kind of in despair about the matter, in part because just of all the moving parts involved. The federalism of the country, our balkanized electricity grid, state authority, regional differences in the kind of energy mixes generating electricity, and so forth. I liked Ms. Saunders' analogy to evolution. Of course, evolution never ends, right? Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. But one part of evolution, if I can extend that metaphor a little bit, of course, is natural selection, whereby you kill off the uncompetitive organisms, right, and the weaker genes, so to speak. It's hard to do that in the energy field. Case in point would be, and I hesitate to do this because it will be interpreted as a reproach of this body, but the whole ethanol program, which even most environmentalists now say is not what we thought it would be. when we started, and yet it's very hard for all the usual reasons to change course on that. And that's ultimately maybe going to be in the way of, say, algae biofuels if we make a breakthrough there. And by the way, one of the moving parts in the whole ethanol story is our very high tariff against imports of Brazilian ethanol, which would probably make sense if we really want to focus on that goal of reducing oil imports or use of traditional petroleum products. So I'll just limit it to that.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in listening to this hearing, I'm starting to believe that this is really a question of whether we have an energy policy that's based upon economics or a social policy. Perhaps it could be a mix of the two. But when you look at our free trade agreements with the 17 countries, you see how we actually have a surplus. As I mentioned in my opening statement, dealing with manufacturing, we had a $21 billion surplus. And dealing with services, we had $144 billion. So when you have free trade agreements, you don't need to necessarily go in and subsidize all these industries, including a green technology. Ms. Saunders, you mentioned a potential increase of $40 billion per year in green technology exports, but obviously that's going to consist of a little bit subsidizing by taxpayers. We had $80 billion set aside in the American Recovery and Investment Act for clean energy investment. The President's indicated he wants to invest another $150 billion into R&D. So my question to you is, this $40 billion you're talking about, couldn't we just get this by additional trade revenue generated by just passing pending trade agreements we have to get this number that you're offered?
Thank you, Mr. Stearns. That number is from the Department of Energy, a projection on the value of potential exports and its relationship to jobs in that sector. To speak to free trade agreements, there are tremendous benefits, as you've already illustrated effectively, both in terms of markets, tariff-free or low-tariff markets for finished products, but I think equally important, opening up markets for intermediate inputs that U.S. manufacturers import as part of their supply chain. So it frees up both the ability of manufacturers to locate facilities here in the United States and import inputs that as part of their supply chain, as well as the markets for their end products. And we've seen a tremendous benefit, as you noted, from the 17 current free trade agreements. The areas where we have the key markets for green technologies and where we have where we have some of the greatest challenges, so China, India, and Brazil, for example.
Well, with that in mind, how do U.S. tariffs for green technology imports compare to tariff levels imposed by other countries for similar products and technology?
Generally, U.S. tariffs are lower on average than tariffs in most other countries. As several of the speakers said earlier, we agree it's critically important to push for a negotiation of an agreement on environmental goods and services. These are new products, new tariff lines, which aren't necessarily covered under existing WTO commitments and perhaps not under existing free trade agreements. And so we've called them out as a special set. And then as a subset of environmental goods and services, the U.S. and the European Union have both joined to push for particularly rapid movement in the areas of clean energy technologies because of the demonstrated global need for those technologies. So we agree it's very important to negotiate environmental goods and services agreement to lower both tariff and non-tariff barriers. We're trying a variety of means to support a global agreement, which include bilateral discussions with key trading partners, as well as moving issues through the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, which sometimes provides a good venue to tee up concepts that can then go global.
Mr. Hayward, I'll let you respond to that. You might also talk in your in response. You talk in your testimony about how domestic mandates on the energy supply can actually decrease exports of green technology. You might touch on that too, expand a bit on it.
Well, I only mean something very simple, which is if we really do try and seriously ramp up wind, solar, and other renewable energy installations in this country on a large scale, as is contemplated in various policies. Seems to me we're going to be using all of our own production capacity ourselves, and quite possibly, since we're going to need a lot of minerals that we're not currently producing in large enough quantities in this country, we'll have to import some. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm trying to speak narrowly to this question of are we actually going to see growth in energy exports across the board, or are we actually going to end up importing more? As I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but let's not get too carried away from ourselves thinking there's a free lunch here. That if we expand our renewable energy production, we're going to be selling lots and lots of it overseas, even if we can fight through the tariff barrier problems.
What are the economic downsides when you take money out of more productive areas of the economy through taxes or increased national debt to less efficient sectors of the economy? Is there an economic response to the subsidies and what the danger could be?
Well, that gets back to some classical economic ideas that have fallen out of favor. The classical old idea was the broken window fallacy. If somebody throws a rock through a storekeeper's window, the glassmaker gets a job. On the other hand, the storekeeper's not spending that capital on something else that might be net more productive across an economy. So, I say that lots of things are changing fast, and cost curves are shifting very quickly in solar and wind, and then other things we're talking about, maybe hydrogen in 15 years, who knows. But at the present time, most renewable technologies we're trying to develop at scale are quite a bit more expensive. And it also will mean if we're serious about closing 100 coal power plants in the next 20 or 30 years. We'll be retiring assets before their useful life is up. So we'll be diverting some capital in the classic sense of opportunity costs, and that will have some effect on the economy elsewhere. Now, what I like to say is, we're a rich country, or we used to be until a year ago, and we will be again. And we can afford a lot of these things in the service of wanting to change our greenhouse gas emissions and so forth. But unless the rest of the world the entire world follows along with us, it's going to make a lot less difference to the bottom line on climate change in 30, 40 years.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just close. I just want each of the panelists to answer yes or no. Do you support the 3 pending free trade agreements, and do you support pursuing new free trade agreements? Just down the line, yes or no.
Yes.
Mr. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobs?
To both questions.
Yes.
Morrison?
I don't know enough to comment.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, for 2 minutes for questioning.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, the broken window theory has different meanings in different contexts. I understand the meaning that's been immortalized in the motion picture, The Fifth Element. There's some jobs in it for somebody. If you break something, there's always somebody's going to get something good out of this. In the law enforcement context, it has an entirely different notion. You take care of the little things, and the big things will take care of themselves. If you got crime running rampant in the streets, if you enforce the zoning laws and the building maintenance laws, the little things you can get a handle on, get rid of graffiti, you'll find the bigger problems sort of take care of themselves because of the ripple effect. You have the miracle of compound interest in terms of folks' involvement in their community is sort of one way of looking at it. I want to talk about the little thing about a level playing field, because the sense I get is the WTO ain't even trying to address free trade in environmental goods and services. So if I get the sense of what the witnesses are telling us today, it's not that the whole approach of free trade has been tried and found wanting so much as it hadn't been tried at all in the first place. Is that the sense of things?
I wouldn't. I actually was, when you made your opening statement
Does that have to be you? Is anybody who says that the WTO is actually focused on this like it is on agriculture and other sectors? Is anybody willing to say that?
No, I think you're generally right about
Okay. Well, that's a concern I got. If we got, for example, because we have so much experience in the areas where the WTO is active, that's not very satisfactory for us. If, for example, in Denmark, they are using laws that are ostensibly for safety standards, but essentially what they're doing is they're protecting a domestic industry. At the same time, they're using the tax expenditure policy to essentially raise money from their taxpayers to lend to customers in other countries, to buy stuff only on the condition that it's made in their country. They're using both laws and the public fisc to promote their industries. For those folks who want us to engage in advocacy and to use the tax expenditure policy of this country to promote industry here, I want to point out that we ain't going to be doing that on a level playing field if our laws are going to be laying us wide open to unfair competition. We're asking the taxpayers in America basically to compete with both the lawmakers and the taxpayers in other countries. That ain't a level playing field. Can anybody help us understand how free trade in this area can work in some way that's not a one-way street?
You're okay.
Mr. Barrow, I think that you're correct. The WTO, for the most part, historically has not addressed energy trade by and large. However, there is growing recognition in the WTO and among member states of the WTO that this is an important area to move into. And the WTO did have its first, it's the first that I'm aware of, set of a conference focused on different types of cleaner energy technologies and what needs to be done to remove barriers to those technologies. And there will be another conference that is co-sponsored by the WTO in a couple of weeks in Geneva. There were also some statements in the press, both by the European Union and by the U.S. Trade Representative last week, that they are seriously looking at this idea of an environmental goods and services agreement, and they talked about it being done probably within the confines of the WTO to make it binding. And the value of this, Mr. Barrow, would be that it allows the United States, which has, as Ms. Saunders said, relatively low tariffs, to move to a level playing field with our competitors if we get them to sign on to this sort of agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll only note that it'll only be a level playing field if the rules are going to be enforced fairly. And what I'm concerned about is we have very little confidence in the way things have been run so far to think that the rules that are supposed to open up their markets on the same terms that ours will be open to them will be playing on a level playing field. That's just a concern I've got. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes Mr. Scalise for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that in a lot of these new technologies we're talking about, wind turbines, some of the different hybrids with the battery technology requirements, the actual components to build those, and I'll talk specifically about some of the metals and the rare elements, copper, zinc, others, that exist in the United States but really aren't accessible because of federal policies, and so we end up importing a lot of those from places like China.
2 minutes.
Do you think as we try to look at the different effects of green jobs in the increased requirement to bring in more of these products to make some of these different things, how, Ms. Saunders, if you could start, how does our country address that when we actually have policies that block us from making and accessing a lot of our own natural resources here?
Well, I can address what we're doing in the international trade space. We're well aware of the critical resource issues that are facing U.S. companies and rare earths and other, other materials, raw materials, and we are well aware that China has been buying up lots of mining rights in various parts of the world in those areas. And you may know that recently China had proposed to initiate a limit or a restriction on exports of those critical materials, and they have yet backed off from that policy under a lot of pressure from the United States government and other governments. So we're well aware it's a critical issue. We work closely with both U.S. companies that need access to those materials, as well as the Department of Defense and its critical national stockpile of critical materials.
So y'all going to be doing anything in policy to open up some more of the United States' natural resources so that we don't have that dependence on countries like China to produce?
That's something I'll take back to the department. That's not within the purview of the International Trade Administration,
Understand.
but I will take
but
it back.
But it still impedes our country's ability to truly export if we have to import in order to make the products that we want to export. Mr. Richards, your company, when you're making decisions on where to locate manufacturing facilities, how much of a factor is the geographical relationship and the ability to access the natural resources that you need to make those products how much of that is a factor in where you locate the manufacturing facilities?
In our particular area, if you think of wind turbines or solar panels or efficient gas turbines, those rare earth minerals are not actually a major component of our decision making and where to locate. More important are questions of transportation costs, what the investment environment is like in any given location, what the market is like in that location. But I would not say that the rare earth minerals has been a big issue for us.
Okay. Mr. Hayward, I know you've talked about some of these issues. What do you...
Well, yeah, one example that comes to mind is battery technology. If someone or some company can come along and make a battery technology that's comparable in its energy potency to a gasoline engine, gasoline storage in your gas tank, it just changes everything. That would be the game changer we need to be equivalent to the green revolution in agriculture that Norman Borlaug brought us 40 years ago. If we use some variation of existing lithium-ion technology that right now we use in all our laptops, well, we need a whole lot of lithium. We don't have a lot of it here. The leading supplier is Bolivia. And we talk about how we don't like to buy resources from countries that don't like us, which sounds sensible to me. This week, Bolivia doesn't like us. So we're trading one kind of problem for another potentially. Yeah, I mean, once again, it's not entirely a black and white situation. And I always like to say, sort of abstract slightly, that the idea of energy independence, interpreted strictly as four-square production of all our energy inside the borders of the U.S., is really a nonsensical idea. We should be looking for energy resilience and energy diversity. So that might include importing a lot of lithium from Bolivia, but it will mean that our trade flows are going to continue to be kind of murky.
All right. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Murphy for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to start by pointing out that one of the things that happens is we recognize wind power is wanted, but Congress does a lot of things to prevent them from being built in their district. And that also means we need power lines to send electricity from a source like that to other places too, but members of Congress oftentimes block building a grid in their district. We know that nuclear energy is a valuable clean source, but members oftentimes say let's not store those nuclear fuel and let's not recycle it. We recognize natural gas is a valuable clean resource, but members of Congress block building facilities in their district and block taking down bridges so ships can move through there. And, of course, as members of Congress, we oftentimes block free trade agreements to deal with the tariffs. And so I don't have a lot of optimism here that Congress is working smoothly for these things. But I have a couple of questions here on a couple of specific issues. Mr. Richards, on some of your testimony here, you talked about the number of jobs being created through wind energy. I think you list about 4,000 overall that growing from here. Does that sound about right, that what GE is seeing growth?
That's correct. That's jobs within GE and our suppliers here in
I might note for the record, that's about the same number of jobs it takes to build and operate one coal-fired power plant. I also noticed that you've worked very hard at sending jobs over to China for light bulbs, and are working to send some locomotive manufacturing jobs over to China as well. Can you tell me how that helps our imports or exports, please?
Congressman, we invest in many countries all around the world, and we are investing heavily in the United States. We've invested.
Well, then what percentage of your windmills is actually manufactured in the United States?
I don't have. I can give you the exact figure, but it's well over 50%.
Well over 50. So, just under 50% then is manufactured in other places around the world. Then.
That's correct. We have manufacturing in the European Union, in Germany, and manufacturing.
Do places in the European Union also manufacture windmills and solar panels? And I'm just wondering, in other markets, how are we creating these that will actually sell to the markets if other countries are building them as well? And we have tariffs and other things in line that block our products from being sold. So how are we going to compete in other countries?
We export very frequently. We will export the highest technology components of a product, even if we are doing final assembly in another country. For instance, with high-efficiency gas turbines, that's generally what we do, and we manufacture those here in the United States. The same is true with locomotives. When we have final assembly of locomotives in another country, usually we're making the highest technology component of that in Grove City, Pennsylvania, Erie, Pennsylvania, for export. So it truly is a global economy, and we have to be able to have local manufacturing in some cases, but that does not mean that it precludes U.S. exports. Often that facilitates U.S. exports.
So that, with regard to some of those things, and when you find that you can make them less expensive in other countries, that's obviously a business decision that GE makes. So what assurance do we have that opening up these markets, if that's where the growth is going to be in some of these areas, that you're not just going to move that manufacturing over to other countries? How is that helping U.S. exports? Because you've done it in the past. How is that going to help?
Congressman, we have maintained U.S. manufacturing in virtually every one of the areas that I spoke of our Eco-Imagination products. We have a commitment to growing our manufacturing presence in the United States, and we have a desire.
Well, do you plan on making any compact fluorescent bulbs in the United States?
Mr. Congressman, I'm afraid I don't have that information. I'd have to.
Well, that's an important green source of jobs, and it best doesn't help us if you export those. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Hayward, in your testimony, you briefly and succinctly indicated that American renewable energy produces rightly point to existing trade barriers and tariffs as an obstacle to expanded trade in the energy technology. In my opinion, one of the easiest, most beneficial ways to assist these companies is to help remove tariffs by enacting free trade agreements. Specifically, the United States has already signed 3 free trade agreements that have yet to be fully implemented by the Democratic majority. The first of these is the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. Over 10,000 companies are already exporting to Colombia. And of these companies, 85% are small to medium-sized companies. In 2007, the United States exported close to $8.6 billion in goods to Colombia. By enacting this FTA, we will greatly benefit, particularly in the agricultural industry, by eliminating high tariffs on items that could inevitably be used in renewable energy production. Since the signing of the FTA with no congressional action, United States exports have faced an estimated $1.1 billion in tariffs in Colombia, while 91% of imports from that country have entered the United States duty-free. In addition to the Colombia FTA, this Congress has still not acted on the Panama Trade Promotion Agreement, and it was signed back in 2007. And that year, the United States employed a large trade surplus of $3.3 billion with Central American country. Under this agreement, 88% of American commercial product would be allowed to enter duty-free immediately. And this could certainly benefit American manufacturers during these most difficult economic times. And lastly, the United States has signed, but not enacted, a free trade agreement with South Korea. The United States International Trade Commission estimates that the reduction of Korean tariffs and tariff rate quotas on goods alone would add between $10 and $12 billion to our annual GDP and around $10 billion to annual merchandise exports to Korea. Enacting this free trade agreement would have a direct impact on jobs growth in the United States by opening additional markets for export. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce recently released a study on the price that inaction on these FTAs has cost American business and exports. This study, entitled Trade Action or Inaction, the Cost for American Workers and Companies, indicates that a failure to implement FTAs with South Korea and Colombia alone will lead to a decline of $40.2 billion in U.S. exports of goods and services. Failure to act would also leave $44.8 billion in missed opportunity of U.S. output, while also missing the chance to create 400,000 jobs for hardworking families right here at home. Mr. Haywood, I've outlined the benefits of these free trade agreements and the cost of inaction for the purpose of explaining how we can take immediate and decisive steps to help bolster exports, including in the arena of green technology, by facilitating free and fair trade. Although you only briefly mentioned the trade barriers that exist due to tariffs, I would like to get your thoughts on this matter.
Well, I guess I'd say that we're in heated agreement. I'd make 2 comments of a general nature. One is of all things economists argue about, the thing they argue about the least is free trade. I mean, there's almost no daylight between Milton Friedman and Paul Krugman, which is really amazing when you think about it. I mean, there's probably no greater economic issue which there's a greater consensus, I'd say probably 95% of professional economists, than free trade. But as a political matter, it seems to me the case for ratifying those treaties is overwhelming, especially in the case of Colombia, which is a country friendly to us, under tremendous political pressure at the moment, vulnerable to a civil war. It would be much better to assist them with free trade and expanded trade than it would be to contemplate what the alternatives might be if that country falls apart. Panama and South Korea are under some pressures as well also, but it's certainly in the case of Colombia, the political reasons to do it seem to me overwhelming.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I took a long time framing that question. I thought it was very important. I appreciate, Mr. Haywood, your direct and succinct answer. I agree with you 100%. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Mr. Chair, thanks, the gentleman. We will engage in a second round of questioning. We will limit the question to 2 minutes and will ask the witnesses to be as succinct as possible in their answers. The chair recognizes himself for 2 minutes. Recently, we have seen that the Unisolar Avonics, a Michigan-based company that produces thin Film Solar partnered with nearby Montcalm Community College to provide training for current and future employees. If each of you could answer this question. I'm curious to know what education level will be required for individuals to adequately perform the jobs created from the expansion of the green technology market, both at home and abroad. And secondly, are certain skills attained from other industries easily transferable? Would you, each one of you, take a stab at that question, or those two questions?
Okay. This is not my area of expertise, but what I've heard from companies and from state economic development association administrations and community colleges in my travels around the country are that there'll be a variety of jobs from the technician level to the undergraduate degree in engineering to master's degree in engineering. There'll be a variety of levels, but the basic level will be the technician level. And then in some areas, job retraining is not terribly difficult. I really do point to and congratulate the various state programs that have gotten out in front of this issue. As I said, the Economic Development Administration is working with universities and working with community colleges to provide training programs, working with companies, and I'm sure GE has programs like that. These are critical skill development opportunities that we need to make more broadly available.
Are there any model states?
Well, I won't call it a model state, but I was just most recently in Toledo, Ohio, on a energy efficiency roadshow, and Toledo has done, that area has done an excellent job of reinventing itself as a leader in solar technologies, and it was impressive to see the university and the local community colleges and the Manufacturing Extension Partnership and all of the resources working together. But that's just because it was a recent trip.
Thank you. Would you, Mr. Richards?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with the points made by Ms. Saunders and just add one personal note about the point that many of the skills, in fact, are transferable. I was with a group that was recruiting at the U.S. Naval Station in Norfolk, and we were recruiting for wind service technicians there because we found that many of the naval personnel who had worked in technical jobs in the Navy actually had the skills that we needed to perform maintenance and service on wind turbines. So I think that, in fact, there are obviously a large subset of skills that are transferable and others that require further community college and other worker training.
I concur largely. I can just add another industry layer. Often speak with our solar industry, and they talk specifically about how they work with the roofers. And, that for them is a very transferable skill set, a very good group of high-quality jobs, and they're very happy to work with them. But what I hear universally, because I represent efficiency, both supply and demand side, a wide range of renewable energy technologies and natural gas, is that we have tremendous need for this workforce right now, and they have a very difficult time finding qualified workers across the whole supply chain and across the whole spectrum of job opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Larson?
I would just like to emphasize that one of the ways that we develop our domestic capacities in order to excel in global markets is to have constant feedback into the process of innovation so that your technologies and the ability of people to work with the application of those technologies have to be continuously upgraded. This is an area of innovation that most people overlook. It's imperative that we have people who are trained in the communities to be able to install new technologies, work with them, provide feedback, sensible feedback to manufacturers to continue to refine and upgrade and innovate. And currently, we don't really have that capacity at the local level. A lot of the skills definitely are transferable. There's no doubt about that. And the stimulus package has moved money into my community in Charlottesville, Virginia, and some of that money will be used to train people to be able to work on improving the community's efficiency. This is in neighborhoods and residential and businesses, as well as the installation of clean tech equipment. But there's a huge opportunity there, and I don't really understand why one member here has referred to some of these ideas as social versus economic. You know, having a really skilled workforce around the introduction and use and a continued improvement of these technologies is an economic decision, and that's a really critical piece of this picture that has to be addressed.
Thank you. Mr. Haywood?
I don't have an opinion on this particular question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Mr. Stern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hayward, Mr. Barrow was here because the argument is made that if we subsidize the greening technology industry, so you give government subsidies to these people, then they go out and compete with similarly foreign companies that are also subsidized. Then the competition is based pretty much on who gives the most gets the most from the government. So in effect, taxpayers are supporting the competition for industry to export their products. And if we develop an export industry that's almost entirely dependent upon these federal subsidies, obviously the taxpayers are going to be affected, and I don't know if that's a sustainable model when there's probably an alternative model, which is to allow the free trade and perhaps give loans to these companies but not subsidize them. So you might just touch on the fact is what heavily subsidized industries in America, how do we compete, like Mr. Barrow's argument, if other governments are subsidizing their industry and we don't subsidize ours, and yet we have free trade, don't the other governments then, by providing subsidies to their companies, don't they gain an advantage? So this goes to the fundamental aspect of how free markets work and why competition and not subsidizing sometimes gets more innovation.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases what you'll find is in technologies that are comparable, and this is an important point to come back to in a moment, it ends up being a zero-sum game. I think, I'm sorry Mr. Barrow left because I've been puzzling over his opening statement, which I have a lot of sympathy for, and I think a key distinction needs to be kept in mind here. When you're talking about roughly comparable products, you know, windmills of X efficiency versus X plus 5% efficiency, that ours might be better, and maybe we have a 10% better price, then some of those tariff barriers and local content requirements will tip the balance unfairly in favor of a foreign country's own producers. On the other hand, there's a lot of areas where we have massive competitive advantage. And I'm thinking, by the way, again, our leading manufactured exports from 2 years ago was aircraft equipment. You know, we beat the world at most areas of that, especially jet engines. And we have seen the case of where I think we did win, I didn't follow this intimately, but I think we did win the WTO complaint against subsidies for Airbus production, although I notice Airbus, most of them use our engines, because ours are so much better than theirs that those marginal preferences, in other words, the preferences you try and give either through a 10% tariff or through a local content requirement, we simply blow right through those because ours are so much better. So the challenge for industry is, please subsidize us for solar or wind power or other technologies that other countries can make almost as well as we can, and therefore we're fighting, you know, something of a zero-sum game, is can our industries make those technologies that are so much better, and it's true of our oil and gas equipment is superior in many respects, drilling equipment is superior in many respects, that all those kinds of attempts that those other countries use to prefer their own producers, you simply blow right through them because ours are better. That's the challenge, it seems to me, for industry, and I think I'll just stop and leave it at that. It seems to me that's a distinction to be laid out that people need to get their hands around.
Just another question for Ms. Saunders. You state the Department of Energy estimates green technology will export up to 750,000 jobs by 2020. And how many jobs will be lost due to green technology displacing them, particularly if we subsidize green technology?
I don't have the answer to that question. I can go back and try to see if I have an answer to that question. Just a brief comment on subsidization, which I agree with you is an important issue to consider. That our import administration, which is a component of the International Trade Administration, is very active in enforcing the existing trade laws, which address anti-dumping and countervailing duties for goods that are coming into the United States that are either subsidized by foreign countries or are being produced at less than production cost. And we have quite a few cases ongoing right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask Ms. Saunders to just respond to my question in writing, if she could.
Okay.
Basically, you know, the cost-risk analysis.
The chair, thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to continue to follow up on some of my questions here and follow up Mr. Stern's question as well, and continue on with General Electric. How many jobs have we lost from closing your light bulb plants in the U.S.?
Congressman, I don't have those figures with me, but we would be.
How many jobs has China gotten from you opening up factories in China to make light bulbs?
Again, Congressman, I don't have any information with me at this time.
Ms. Sanders, just to follow up on Congressman Stern's question, too, about the displacement of jobs, I'm assuming all of you, if you went to the doctor and the doctor said, I want you to take some medicine, one thing you'd want to know is, what are the side effects? The doctor says, I'm clueless. I never studied side effects of medicine. I'll just tell you what it's going to do to you. You'd think he's a kook and you'd leave the room, right? So I'd like to know, what are the side effects of this? Because we have to balance all this out. And so as we look at this, because we want to make sure as Congress we're doing this in a way that we're not losing jobs, to promote these technologies in solar and wind and all these other things, make sure we have this, but not do this in a way that actually hurts our job development. So does anybody have an answer to that question? Then you shouldn't be here. Not a single one of you should come unprepared with that, because that's important to us. I think that's extremely important, because we've got to know how we balance these out. So let me ask this then, too. As we go through these issues then, well, I see I'm out of time here, and you're going to keep this to 2 minutes, but you get my point. Please come prepared and give us an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the gentleman made a strong point. However, I think that the witnesses have really adequately addressed the questions of most of the members of the subcommittee. I don't want the witnesses to think that their time and their participation was for naught. I think that you provided us with some real important information that we can proceed with. And that you've been a real help to the work of the subcommittee. And I don't want you to get the impression that we don't really appreciate your time and your comments and your input. And we want to thank you for participating with us here and taking the time out from your busy schedule. And we want to just inform the members of the subcommittee that the record will be open for 7 days, and that if there are any questions that the members of the subcommittee would like to address in writing to the witnesses, you have 7 days to prepare those questions, and we will ask that the witnesses take an additional 7 days to get back to us with those written answers to the questions. I want to thank you again so very much. The subcommittee is now adjourned.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you.